I love this analogy of a car crash. You're in a car crash, destroys your car, totally scary, right? It's a traumatic event for you. Maybe you get hurt or whatever.
Yep.
You don't want to get back in a car.
Right.
Right? Because you're just like, that's going to happen again, whatever. You finally get back in the car, you're driving down the road, you get in another major car accident.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You go right back to like having to deal with all that again, having to deal with the trauma, having to deal with talking yourself into getting back into a car again.
Yeah.
And again.
Yeah.
And so I just like to say that so that like spouses who are confessing, just realize that your partner has decided to get back in the car again and gotten into another crash.
Okay.
They have to work through that.
Yeah.
Don't ask them to get back in the car again the next day.
Okay.
You have to give them space to heal the wounds, work through the trauma, the anxiety, the fear, all of that over and over again. My name is Caroline, and I'm a counselor.
My name is Brett, and I'm a pastor.
And together, we're tackling difficult topics from a biblical perspective.
Welcome to There We Said It. All right, we're back, and welcome to another episode of There We Said It. I'm Brett.
I'm Caroline.
And we are truly excited that you're with us today. And we're grateful that one of our listeners actually sent in a question.
They did. Well, two listeners.
Two listeners sent in the question.
We can't do two questions
Only
in
one.
one day. That's just pushing it.
Yeah. One thing that, Caroline was the champion of this, and I think it's 100% true, is that, as you build a relationship with a counselor and a pastor, it's important to get to know them. It's important that you feel that you know a little bit about them as they get to know you. And so that's why we kind of do these opening questions. It's also kind of a fun way to just kind of jump into what often is some pretty serious content. Yeah. So
we want to be relatable.
We do.
We're not serious.
Well, right.
That often. Only for like the 40 minutes when we talk about our topic.
I was going to say, we've been in here laughing for 35 minutes. And we're like, we probably should get serious and do this now.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question that came in is, what is your favorite childhood memory? So, Carolyn, you
I get to
tee
go
it
first.
up. Mm-hmm.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I had to think about. I didn't have to narrow that down to one. Right, is really hard. So what I came up with was, which people will laugh because at the end of our, my brain is just fried. At the end of our YouTube thing or our. You know what I'm saying.
I do not know if anyone knows.
Because I love Dr. Pepper. That's where I'm going with that.
Okay.
This is going to be a fun one today, folks. I've been up since 4 a.m.
Rock it.
And I've only had half of my Dr. Pepper.
Own it.
Okay. So, of course, my favorite memory is going to be my dad taking us to Quick Stop.
Okay.
So I don't know if Quick Stops are still around, but it was, like a convenience store, like an AM, PM or 7-Eleven or a Cruisers, whatever you have. And so, we would get to go to Quick Stop, and I love that because you got something cool there.
Okay.
The thing is usually it would be you can get a soda or you can get a candy bar. And so I would have to walk around for quite a while because I'm
thinking about those choices.
Do I want the soda? Do I want the candy bar? Do I want the Dr. Pepper or do I want the 100 grand? Or do I want the whatchamacallit? Whatchamacallits are amazing. Every once in a while, though, he'd be like, you can have both.
Whoa.
And I thought
that was the day.
Life could not get any better. When you got to pick both.
Wow.
That was you hit the jackpot.
And you as a parent know what your dad was doing, which of course was trying to not give you that much sugar that he'd have to deal with for the afternoon. So a candy bar and a soda, that's a lot of sugar.
I think he was getting the look from my mom because she was, most of the time in the car too. I think he was getting the side eye and he'd be like, all right, you can only have one.
Yeah.
And I know that because it's reversed in our house and my husband gives me the side eye and I'll be like, hey, we got to stop at 7-Eleven. I got to get my Dr. Pepper. And he's like, do you have to get the kids something too? And I would be like,
you're like, yeah, get
what
them
kind
both.
of a question? Is that even a question? Of course you have to get the kids.
It's funny how we do that as
too.
parents, right?
Yeah.
When we had to live in the either or, we tend to go with, we'll either mimic that or we'll simply say, you know what, just get both.
Yeah. Well, I do that now. Now when we go, you get a sweet and a savory.
Oh, nice.
Is mine. So that could be
I feel like Slim Jim makes that the
Slim
sweet
Jim,
and savory.
Takis. My son usually gets Takis, and he's getting the red dye Takis and a red dye soda.
Oh.
And it's just usually all over him, and I'm like, great parenting.
That's the day of days.
But those
right
are memories.
there.
I love it because I know he's gonna have those memories because I had those memories. So. there you go.
Awesome.
Of course, Dr. Pepper would be involved in my favorite childhood memory.
Okay, if you wanna really bless Caroline, send her a Dr. Pepper. I'm not sure where because we actually don't have a mailing address, but
you can bring one to me. I literally just told my friend yesterday that if you bring me a Dr. Pepper or a decaf, I know it's very weird, or a decaf latte, you fill up my love tank. I don't know what it is.
There you go. Stop by Downing Park or stop by Calvary Church and drop off your Dr. Peppers this week. Well, my story is I don't know if it's like my favorite childhood memory or like a childhood memory I'm still trying to like receive some healing from. So
the childhood trauma.
Yeah. So my dad was notorious for giving very odd gifts to me, his son. And so the most notorious would be one day when I was probably 10, 11, somewhere in that age, maybe just a hair older. I had this friend who had a cat, and I spent the night at his house. And I love dogs, but I'm okay with cats too. And, this cat kind of was like friendly. And so I came home and I was like, hey, I want to get a cat. And so we lived in the middle of the woods in Nowhereville, Michigan. And so, my parents were like, I don't know, we'll think about it. Well, like maybe 2 weeks later, my dad came back and he said, hey, I got a surprise for you. And so he goes, it's in the trunk. So as we walk up to the trunk of his car, there is like a ferocious sound of some creature in this trunk that is like very mad to be in there. So
that doesn't make you want to open the trunk.
No, but I was intrigued. So I'm like, okay, let me check it out. And so he puts his hand on the hood and he goes, oh, I got to get something. So he goes into the back of the car and he grabs a pair of long leather gloves, the kind that like go up to your elbow, like the kind of Falcon would land on if you were one of those people. And he goes, you got to put this on. And I'm like, okay. And so he opens the trunk.
You really trusted your dad.
Well, I mean, I'm a young dude, man. Dad says put the gloves on, I got to put the gloves on. So he opens his trunk, and in there is like the equivalent of like a banana crate with like holes in it. And there is a cat in there that is very upset that it's in there. Okay? And he goes, okay, now, he goes, this thing's a little ornery, but I got you a cat. He's like, you wanted a cat? I got you a cat. And this did not sound like a normal cat at all. And the crate was huge, and it kind of like filled it. So I came to find out my dad brought home a bobcat, an actual bobcat.
How did he even get a bobcat?
Okay, so later I found out that somebody had accidentally like trapped this thing because it was like killing their chickens or something, and they caught it in like a live trap, and they didn't know what to do with it. And so somehow my dad got crossed up with this person and relieved them of their bobcat, thinking, I'll give this to my son. He wants a cat. So when I pull the lid off this thing to grab this creature, because I'm like, hey, if it's a cat, I want to pet it, right? There was about 1 second, maybe less, when I pulled like the top off this thing, that it looked at me. And it had the pointy ears, the stubby tail, the big feet. This was like a bona fide, adolescent bobcat. Okay. It looked at me in the eyes. I looked at it in the eyes, and I kid you not, I think it nodded at me, like it nodded in affirmation, like thanks, man. And then it jumped over both of our heads, like way over both of our heads, because bobcats can jump like really high. It jumped way over our heads and ran into the woods with such speed that cat was gone. And God. It literally just returned to the wild from which it had previously come.
And eat the chickens.
And so then for like a month and a half, I named this thing Bobby the Bobcat.
You gave it a name?
I did, man. I had a cat for like 1 second. And so then in the woods, I was like, Bobby. And needless to say, that cat did not come. And that story has remained in infamy in my family ever since that day. So
I wonder how much of that was just your dad trying to teach you a lesson. Like, don't ask for a cat, dude.
I don't know. I asked him about it like later, and he didn't really have like a good response. He's like, I don't know. The guy had to get rid of it, and I didn't want to see it hurt, so I just brought it home to you, and I thought maybe you could tame it, but I was wrong, and you were wrong.
I'm pretty sure he didn't ask your mom about that before he brought it
No,
home.
In fact, I don't ever think mom ever like heard about that until like later. So anyway, there you go. Keep the stories coming. We are happy to open up and make you laugh over our trauma. So today we are talking about trauma. This is a part 2 to our session last week, which is on pornography. Thank you so much for all the feedback and shares that you had in that.
So let's do a little disclaimer again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just like we did last week. If you listen to this with your kids, you might want to listen yourself before you listen in front of them, because we will be delving into pornography, sex addiction again.
Yep.
And also how last week I said those who have the spouses who've been affected by pornography addiction, this episode is for you. And I asked you to listen last week. And so this week I'm going to ask those who are sex addicts or who have struggled with that, please listen to this week too, because this will give you some understanding of how what you're doing is affecting other people. This will give you some empathy. This will give you some tools and wisdom to help your spouse or loved one who is working through their trauma.
That's good. So the phrase that we're going to kind of use and reference today is a phrase that Caroline was helping me get familiar with, and maybe it's unfamiliar to you, but the phrase is betrayal trauma.
Correct.
And so it's kind of a spectrum word where there's obviously trauma is trauma. It's not just if someone betrayed you sexually or, spiritually. And so I just want to give this definition quick, and then we can kind of focus it a little bit for the sake of the conversation. So this is from Oregon State's psych department. Is just one that we pulled from that we thought was actually kind of fun. So they define betrayal trauma as trauma that occurs when people or institutions in which a person depends for survival significantly violates that person's trust or well-being. Mm-hmm. It can be childhood trauma, physical trauma, emotional, sexual, or spiritual, perpetuated by a caregiver, are examples of betrayal trauma. So help us focus that in, Caroline, from a counselor's standpoint as we think about the context of what we spoke about pornography and kind of how that impacts those who suffer that betrayal.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back just a little bit, because betrayal trauma is somewhat new. I mean, it's been around for some decades now, but in the world of mental health, like the normal was when you were the partner of a sex addict, you automatically were either labeled a co-addict or a codependent. That was the original name. And then you had people come along finally and study this, like, what is this doing to that person's brain and body? And they, through studying it over years, realized that it is trauma. Like, the effects that it has on you are the same effects that it has on someone who's been through a major traumatic event, a car crash, a natural disaster that's destroyed something, someone who's been to war, like PTSD, because it literally can cause PTSD.
Sure.
So, so some of my story is when in my marriage, we have dealt with sexual addiction for most of the span of my marriage, on and off. And originally when things came out, I was told as the spouse, well, you're a codependent. You got issues too. You should go work on yourself. And so immediately, and I just remember thinking, like, I didn't even know what a codependent was at that. And I'd read it and I'd just be like, I don't feel like I'm a codependent. So I was told, go do a 12-step, go to this program and just focus on you because you have issues too.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that I have now realized actually did more damage than good, because no one dealt with the trauma. I didn't deal with the trauma because no one told me that there was trauma.
Yeah.
And that is not to say that I don't have issues, and that is not to say that I don't have codependent tendencies. We all have codependent characteristics.
Sure.
So, but do we all need to be labeled codependent? No.
No, right.
So literally in the last just over a year have I been diving deep into betrayal trauma and learning about like what it's done to me and my body and my brain, and now really healing from that.
So how did that process start? How did you start deep diving into this a year ago, going from that place where you were, where you actually received more trauma from people trying to, be helpful, let's just say, by saying, well, you have issues too. You contributed to this in some way, shape, or form. Go work on you. He'll go work on him. So how did you overcome that? And then what was the catalyst that kind of brought you to this new revelation?
A book.
Okay.
It was literally a book. I have it here. It is called Your Sexually Addicted Spouse: How Partners Can Cope and Heal. And it's written by Barbara Steffens and Marcia Means. And Barbara Steffens is one of the pioneers who really dove in and started doing the research and studying on it. And so we had disclosure again a little over a year ago, and I just, like, the way I spun out was just like, wait, but I felt like I'd gotten so healthy because I'd been working on myself all these years and going to counseling and stuff, and then starting to read this book, which, and it will be one of our resources this week on our socials. Rocked my world in a really good way and changed my life, because I started to see, oh, that's what that is. That isn't something wrong with me. That's a trauma response. That is normal.
Got it.
And so it made me realize, like, I'm not crazy. Like, this is all normal stuff, which was really, really, really huge for me. One of the biggest things I learned was what was going on in my brain. So, and we've kind of talked a little bit about our brains before. I think in the feelings one, we talked about the almond-shaped part of our brain, the amygdala, our prefrontal cortex, and then we have our hippocampus, which is what stores all of our memories.
Yeah.
When you go through betrayal trauma specifically, because, right, betrayal trauma is when someone who you have trusted, someone who's supposed to make you feel safe and take care of you, has betrayed you. It's like your hippocampus, that filing system, was flipped over, dumped out, and just, like, messed all the files up on the ground.
Okay.
And so now all of a sudden your brain's freaking out, because it's like, what is true? What is false? It doesn't know, like, what the heck is going on.
Sure.
So that for me was huge, because as your hippocampus is then like, we got to figure out where to put all of these things, you start asking questions. Okay. Like, so anybody who is a sex addict or has been a sex addict and has confessed to their spouse, they probably got, like, a firing rounds of questions, and we're like, what the heck?
Wow.
But that's your brain.
Okay. So I have to say this out loud, otherwise I'm going to giggle. Every time I hear you say hippocampus, I think of hippopotamus.
Oh, I do too.
So not to be confused with hippopotamus. Hippopotamuses have nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to give a full release of all hippopotami on
when
the
I
earth.
Picture the hippocampus file, it's a hippopotamus with a filing drawer.
Just messing up things.
You know, opening its mouth, and there comes the files.
The other thing is I appreciate your knowledge on this, because typically the knowledge of the brain that I have comes from the movie Waterboy, which is just simply the medulla oblongata. So anyway, for all those who out there are laughing right now, I like you. Your humor's awesome. So this is real stuff. So, as we think about this, I think that's really good. You said there was disclosure, which I'm interpreting to mean there was an incident that came to light.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So that's what that means. And that then kind of brought you into this, like, you felt like you were getting healthy.
Yeah.
I felt like you were taking steps forward. And then that disclosure kind of spiraled you back a little bit into some of that trauma again.
Yeah.
So talk about that, because, I've had that in my life where I felt like something happened. I started working through it. I went to go see you that's how our friendship began, is right. I tried to put my own practice, my own preaching into practice, which was to say, your mental health matters. It's something that we really value at Calvary, and it's part of something that God values as we think about the whole of who we are: mind, body, soul, right? It's all of it. And so I'm putting that into practice, working through some things that I had been going through, and I felt like I made some great strides forward. Yeah. And then there was an incident that felt particularly similar, but, like, different. It was a completely different person. It was a completely different situation. And I think I brought some of that former trauma that wasn't completely settled. So talk about that, because I think people really resonate with that. I know I do. So what was that like to get kind of, I guess, triggered? I don't know if you would use that word, but, like, again, from the disclosure that you mentioned.
Yeah. So, gosh, there's like a few things all in that. So first of all, with sex addiction and betrayal trauma, every time there is disclosure again, or you learn something new, or they fall back into it, you literally go back to square one in your healing. So it's the trauma all over again, and you have to start from square one and do it again. Now, I don't say that to like frustrate people, because you will work through it faster every time.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
You know, so
Yep.
practice makes progress, but that's not really something you want to practice. So think of it as, I love this analogy of a car crash. You're in a car crash, destroys your car, totally scary, right? It's a traumatic event for you. Maybe you get hurt or whatever.
Yep.
You don't want to get back in a car.
Right.
Right? Because you're just like, that's going to happen again, whatever. You finally get back in the car, you're driving down the road, you get in another major car accident. Right? You go right back to like having to deal with all that again, having to deal with the trauma, having to deal with talking yourself into getting back into a car again.
Yeah.
And again.
Yeah.
And so I just like to say that, so that like spouses who are confessing, just realize that your partner has decided to get back in the car again and gotten into another crash.
Okay.
They have to work through that.
Yeah.
Don't ask them to get back in the car again the next day.
Okay.
You have to give them space to heal the wounds, work through the trauma, the anxiety, the fear, all of that over and over again.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
So then if someone doesn't deal with that trauma, I guess I immediately think of like, you know, your analogy was like, if you work through it, you're going to, you know, the second, you know, time you're going to go back to square one, but you're going to be able to process forward a little faster.
Because you have the tools now.
Right. The pathway is plowed, I guess, to use an analogy of like snow. But if you didn't process the original trauma, and you didn't, I've seen this in people I've talked to who have like continued to be hurt by similar actions and activities that they don't process. Usually they'll come and see me, or they probably come and see you.
Yeah.
Not usually off the first cut, where they're like, I can get through this through hard work and determination and just like gritting it. And then something happens. And then the second time they're like embarrassed, you know, they feel shame. So then they're like, okay, I don't want to tell anybody about this. And so usually it's like the third, fourth, or fifth time that it happens that they'll come and see me, and they'll say, you know, Pastor, my spouse has had this long history of this. I'm so hurt, but they've never had a chance to process the first trauma.
Right.
And so now when they experience that again, and you know, it's not that like there's high levels and low levels of this pain. I think just pain is pain. When you feel betrayed, someone, you know, does this to you, it hurts. But there are certain things that like I found that when, let's say, this is probably a whole nother part of this conversation, but when that person who created the trauma, the person who did sin and looked at that pornography again, when they actually try to make a step forward and progress, sometimes, you know, I'll find them in my office saying, you know, hey, I really am trying to work through this, but my spouse constantly is like kind of punching down on me. You know, I was looking at my phone the other day and they immediately thought I was looking at porn. And usually my response to that is like, hey, you kind of have to understand where they're coming from, right? I mean, you have a bit of a track record.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if a dog bites you twice, you know, if you see the dog again, even if it went to go Caesar on the show and it came back all like lovey, there's probably a part of you that's like, that dog still bites.
Right. Your body remembers
it's different
that.
now, but it might take some time. So I guess maybe speaking to that a little bit, it's kind of a two-part, you know, what do you do when the trauma is not dealt with? And it's the fifth time now. And then maybe that second part of like when your spouse is actually making steps forward and actually having progress and you're dealing with not being able to trust them and it might set them back in their journey towards being new too.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I lived in that for 20 years. I didn't work on my trauma. I worked on myself, but I worked on like being a better Christian, having better faith. Oh, you got to forgive. Oh, you got to have grace, which yes, and yes.
Right.
And you have to deal with the trauma.
Yeah.
So trauma is stored in our bodies. And if it's not dealt with, it will literally start doing damage. Damage in health ways. Like I could sit here and list off with both of my hands all the health issues I have from not dealing with my trauma over the years. Another thing that I realized, I have done a ton of trauma-based therapy in the last year on myself to work through that. And that a lot of the trauma started in my childhood.
Okay.
And so then when stuff happened in my marriage, it was basically like opening up the wormhole to, oh no, this started in your childhood. So frustrating, right? But even like our spouses who are the addicts, they're going back to their childhood to realize why they're doing what they're doing. So we end up going back to our childhood to be like, oh, this trauma actually started here. Like with my husband, there was a lot of manipulation and gaslighting, and I made it like he was the worst manipulator and gaslighter I'd ever met.
What does gaslighting mean?
Gaslighting is, well, it actually comes from a movie called Gaslight.
Okay.
So that's where they get the term. And in this movie, they had the oil lamps that you would light, or it was gas, and
Sure.
you light that light.
Okay.
And so however much gas was in there, that's how big the light would be.
Okay.
And so the wife would fill it up. And then when the wife left, the husband would take some out, and she would be like, oh, I thought I put gas in there, and where's the light? And he'd be like, no,
So
you
it's
never
like a term of deception a
did it.
bit,
Yeah.
or manipulation in some way.
You're crazy. I don't know why you're thinking that way.
Okay,
Like,
so
you're-
that's kind of
you're
what
wrong.
it is.
Yeah. So
Okay.
they don't take, like, he didn't take ownership of, no, I took the gas out. It was like, no, you never did that.
You never put the gas in
Yeah.
there.
It's putting it back on the other
Okay.
person. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So I would see my husband as this bigger person doing that because I was bringing my trauma from having that done to me by a person in my childhood. That was brought now into here. And so once I could figure that out, like, I realized, oh, he's actually not like this ginormous gaslighter manipulator that I thought. It's actually this from my childhood. So, like, it just compounds, right? When we don't deal with our trauma, it compounds and compounds. And then when there's another trauma, it makes it feel bigger and harder and worse and terrible.
Yeah, it's kind of that megaphone of pain, right? So that's something that we talk about a lot in ministry, is that when you don't deal with your hurts and your trauma, you tend to have like an ear that has a megaphone on it, and so you hear every little thing as that big thing.
Yeah.
And then you apply that same pain, punishment, reaction, withdrawal, whatever it is, to that person. And sometimes relationally, they're like, dude, I didn't even do anything. Like, I just said something small, but they heard it like they had a pebble.
Yep.
You heard a boulder.
Yep.
And now, like, relationally, they're like, I have no idea how to deal with this individual because it comes out as, I mean, not to sound like, it just comes out as very wounded. Like,
Right.
I don't know what's going on inside them, but I didn't mean what they thought I meant.
Yeah. And I often use that example, like when people have like a lot. And so it's, if you're reacting bigger to something than you should, you got to realize, like, there's either trauma there's something there that you haven't dealt with.
Okay.
And so a way that I often tell people, and I do this myself too, is grab our lovely feelings wheel. And you've got to take each thing that you're dealing with. What are the feelings here? What are the feelings here? And you make piles. I make piles of the feelings because right now they're all in one big pile. So I'm going to act like I'm really mad at you and I'm feeling just so frustrated with you. And it feels so big, but it's because earlier today I had to deal with something else that was frustrating, but I never worked through that. So the frustration from this thing is now going on top of my frustration for you. And so it's just compounding and bigger.
Okay. Interesting.
But once you separate it all out and you realize, oh, you know what? This really is only like this much frustration.
Yeah. Small.
So I don't have to overreact to that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think like a question the mentor had sown in me a long time ago before I knew about the feelings wheel had said, a good question of self-awareness is like, what am I feeling right now and why?
Yeah.
And it is a question that takes a little bit of space to process because you might be like, well, I'm mad. Why? Well, because they said something I don't like. But that's not really the answer.
No.
Why am I mad about what they said?
Right.
And then it starts to get deeper. Well, it indicted my honesty.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, you were mad because you felt that they indicted. Now, is it true?
Yeah.
Is that really what they were doing? Yeah, I think so. Okay, dig deeper. Well, then why did they indict your honesty? Was there something you were dishonest about? Was there, you can start going down that process. And so it's not just an easy question that like, oh, I asked it, now I feel better. I think you actually have to give space, and I think you have to invite the Holy Spirit in. If you're a Christian, the Holy Spirit leads us into all truth, and He whispers things to us that are true past what we want to believe. And so don't be surprised if the Holy Spirit whispers something in the process of you saying like, what am I really feeling right now and why? He might say something crazy like, well, you're scared.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm mad. Well, you're mad because you don't want to be scared because you think it's weak and whatever. And, the Holy Spirit will bring you on a whole psychology lesson too.
Yes,
He'll tell you some things. So let's talk a little bit about how Jesus comes into this story and like how he came into your story and like meaningfully, not just like, read your Bible more and be a better Christian. We've said that 1,000 times. That is never the answer. I truly believe that is one of the things that has hurt so many Christ followers over all denominations and many generations, is that when we go through hard things, we get this idea of theology is just be a better Christian and you won't feel this way. And so I'm thinking about a passage in Hebrews where the writer of Hebrews says, in Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet did not sin. Yeah. And, we talked about this, how Jesus, while on this earth for 33 years, did truly experience everything that humanity experiences. And so even betrayal. Jesus experienced betrayal, maybe not in the exact vein that we're talking about in this episode or talked about last week, but he experienced betrayal in the way that his best friends abandoned him. They left him alone when he needed them the most. Yeah. There were disciples that followed him around waving their hands in joy, and then he said one hard teaching, and they're all like, okay, peace out. Yeah. We're not your friends anymore. So
there's Judas.
Judas is probably the greatest example in Jesus' life of betrayal, but there's also Peter. Yeah. I don't know this man. And sometimes I think about that, which is worse? Like there is, Jesus knew Judas was going to, and he's God, he knew Peter was going to do the same thing. He told him, by the time the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times.
And I often think that, dude, Peter, he gave you a heads up, and you still did it.
And so
we all are dumb like that.
We are. And there was this story that God was building that these men were a part of, that even they themselves at that time didn't recognize. The ultimate goal was not for Jesus to avoid the cross, and if Peter or Judas just would have been better boys, Jesus wouldn't have took the cross. He came to take the cross. He was going to hang on the cross for our sins. So that's good news in the sense that nothing was the alternative plan. Humans didn't mess it up and Jesus had to die. No, it was God's plan that his son would die in your place and my place, that by faith, his righteousness, his perfection could be credited to us. And that's good news. But, if you really think about that, his best friends betrayed him. He experienced that pain. So how did Jesus enter into your story? Maybe after that season where you were like, okay, I tried the whole pray harder, go to church more, and be a better Christian. That obviously wasn't super healing. When did it become healing, and how?
I think full healing actually is, full disclosure and honesty is I'm still in full healing. Because like I said, I've just learned about betrayal trauma in the last year. And realized how much damage it's done to my body. God has been with me through the whole entire thing. Obviously, no doubt about that. And I did read the Bible more, and it did grow my faith. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that God didn't reveal betrayal trauma to me until now, because there were other things he was working on. Okay. And so, And I do. And I bring God into every part of whatever therapy I've done. I've done I do a lot of somatic therapy now. Somatic therapy is whole body healing therapy. It's not just the brain. It's not talk therapy. So EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and restoration. I've done a lot of EMDR therapy. And what I love about that is we're basically changing neural pathways in my brain, to believe truth. And I always bring God into that. When I do my somatic therapy, which is a lot of, I don't know, some people might see it as it's self-love therapy or whatever. It is working on that inner stuff. So it is doing grounding exercises to get myself, tell my body, we're right here, we're right now, we're safe. And as I'm doing that, I'm also going, and God is with you, and God's got you, and he's going to keep you safe. That's why I'm safe. Okay. And so, even in doing these exercises, even trauma stored in different part of our bodies. I have a lot of trauma in my hips. I know it's weird. And so I have to do a lot of hip exercises, and literally will sometimes do them and the tears will just start flowing because it's releasing the trauma. And then it's just during those times, I just pray. Take it, God, take my trauma, be a part of the healing. So even in the what some might think are weird therapy things. Like
Sure.
God is there, and I bring him into that.
That's good.
And know he's the ultimate healer. There's nothing I'm going to do is going to ultimately heal me. It's him that's going to heal me.
Yeah, that's so good. I think I appreciate that because I think it reminds us that there are so many different ways to experience God.
Yeah.
And that we can invite God in to these different experiences. I know, a number of people who go to yoga classes, but traditional yoga is based in more of kind of an Eastern religion, apart from Christianity. It doesn't naturally invite Christ in through what you learn. However, they go to these Christian yoga classes that kind of takes that Eastern mythology out and just inserts Christology. And,
Right.
brings us back to
that.
stretching and meditating. Worship music is playing. And,
Yep.
and they will say like it is like the thing they look forward to aside from church, one of their favorite things of the week because it does bring healing and hope. And, I just came back from a conference down in SoCal from last week, and one of the pastors who was talking, his whole ministry is to pastors, that they would be healthy and hopeful, and that his whole talk was about finishing well. And how do you look at the people of the Bible and actually finish your life and ministry well, learning from the lessons of the heroes that, did finish well, and learning from the mistakes of those who started well but didn't finish well, and those who started well and then ended very poorly.
Yeah.
And one of the things he had talked about, it really resonated with me. He said, you have to find ways to get back in touch with God. And if that's, if it's not just sitting and reading the Bible, if it's not just going to church and praying, you have to find new ways to experience God. And it reminded me that one of the way that I used to experience God, and this is where I would talk to the Lord about the things that hurt in my soul. It was the places that I would process some of the traumas I was going through, would be in a walk in nature.
Which is a form of EMDR therapy.
Exactly. So while I would never consider it or label it and say, I think I'm doing EMDR training, it's like I'm going to go for a walk in nature, which God created.
Yep.
I see his beauty and power in, and I'm just going to talk to the Father about the things that are on my heart with no agenda, no sense of what God has to do or say. I'm just open, and I'll go for as long as I want. If it's a 10-minute walk, great. If it's an hour, great. I'm one of those persons that tends to quantify and classify. So it's like, I'm going to take a 10-minute walk. I'm going to talk to God about this. I bet he would probably say this if he's going to do that. And so I have to release all that and say, Lord, I am an open canvas. You can paint whatever picture you want. Today, if you only want to paint the bottom right corner, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of trust and surrender. And it also takes a lot of spiritual awareness, I think, as you continue to grow, because I always didn't do that, but I'm starting to do it more. And I have to get back to doing it again, because I do think there are so many things in my life that make the world busy that the thought of taking a walk with God becomes secondary. Yeah. And I'm starting to realize that maybe that should be a primary thing.
For sure.
So it's super good. Whatever your way is, as you've listened to Caroline and I talk today, I think the hope is that you would find a way to find what works for you, to continue to talk to your pastor or to talk to a counselor. You can talk to me as a pastor, or you can talk to Caroline as a counselor. We are available. We do this podcast to offer you, the listener, what we feel is a robust session with people who have a heart for this and understand it, no charge to you once a week. Yeah. And so we really, truly hope that that's how this feels to you, and that you are sensing a sense of God's presence and leading as we go along.
Yeah, for sure. And this is only 40 minutes. We're just touching the surface of these topics. This is just touching the surface of this topic. We could probably do 4 podcasts just on betrayal trauma and still not really get to the depth. So please, if you are experiencing this, get help, seek help. Look up betrayal trauma and learn more about it, because it is so important to deal with the trauma of what's happened to you before you move on to deal with the rest of it, for sure. And so that's just what we want to let you know today, is that betrayal trauma is real, and you have to heal from it before you can move on. And there, we said it.
Indeed, we did. Well, we want to thank you so much again for joining us on this episode. We, of course, want you to stay informed and up to date on all things with the podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Search There We Said It. And if you like what you're hearing, do us a favor, pass it on to a friend with a little encouragement for why you listen to it. Maybe that will help them have some courage to listen to it as well. And if you have additional questions, please continue to reach out to us at contact@therewesaiditpodcast.com.